What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Liam Picks Fights. Today we're discussing UFC Orlando. It's headlined by a welterweight contest between Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, karate specialist, taking on Kevin Big Mouth Holland. And if you guys have been watching this show for a long time, you know we've been cashing in bigly on a lot of Kevin Holland fights. A couple submission props, ITD. Love this welterweight run that he's been on up till that Chimaev, slaughter. So it should be a really entertaining contest. I'm excited. Don't really love the friendly dynamic between the two of them, kind of throwing off my conviction in a betting read. But we still have 14 great fights to talk about. One fight was canceled on this card already, but we got a lot to dig into. I'm excited to talk about him. So, guys, thank you very much for being here. We got the sharpest chat in the game already firing away. So, without further ado, let's start with the first fight on the card. And if you guys follow me on Twitter at Liam Picks Fights, then you know me and my man at Man Bets MMA, very sharp MMA originator. We put together our best bet and prop of the week. We were trying to look for the best angles, and we debated going the fight not to go the distance here, but we thought that the value is there on Yasmin Waregi inside the distance, right? And I understand why Estela Nunes is a popular play this week in some ways. She's training at American Top Team, great camp. She has some real skills on the feet. She looks very pretty when she's striking, but in terms of the impact, in terms of the intensity and the heft behind the blows, I feel like Yasmin Waregi is throwing with a lot more power. I feel like she is also the more versed fighter on the ground, believe it or not. Her name is Yasmin Jitsu, I think, on Instagram, and she's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt. She's very strong physically. She gets training in and out of the gi. She works with high-level competitors, so I really don't think that the ground game would be a problem for her. I think if she decides to take it there, she may be able to exploit Estela Nunes just a bit. And I think on the feet, it's going to be competitive with the power edge going towards Yasmin from the beginning. But I think that over time, what we've seen from Estela Nunes is she hasn't had 15 minutes of consistent cardio to go in the UFC so far. And Yasmin against Yasmin Lucindo in her UFC debut, that was a fight she took on short notice. She was supposed to fight Estela Nunes. Estela Nunes suffered an injury, had to pull out of that contest. So in steps Yasmin Lucindo, who a lot of sharp cappers were very high on. You guys will remember before the fight, a lot of people were betting on Yasmin Lucindo. I was very big on Yasmin Waregi in that spot, and it was a little bit closer than I expected. But I think that's a credit to Lucindo, who I think is a skilled fighter, and who I think in time, when she's more physically developed and when she's more experienced in her professional career, will have success down the road in the UFC. I think that Yasmin Waregi is physically ready to go right now, and I think that she's probably going to win this fight inside the distance at a decent clip. So I took the plus 200 number on the ITD. That was the best available to me, and she's been submitted twice. I'm talking about Estela Nunes here. Out of her 3 losses in professional MMA. So I did take a stab on Yaz Jitsu by submission. It was over 10-1. Thought that was a good number. Again, 2 out of 3 losses for her in her career. When she starts to fold, when she starts to break in the fight, sometimes when she's losing on cardio, she can get submitted. And I think that could happen here as well. So I think it's a very good fight. I think it's going to be competitive early. I just think Yasmin's going to be able to take over by landing more damaging shots, by having better cardio, by being a little bit more committed in her strikes. And that's what I expect to see. So next up, we'll talk about Francis Marshall and Marcelo Rojo. And this is another really interesting contest. You talk about experience here. Marcelo Rojo obviously has the edge in experience, been around since The Ultimate Fighter. But, I think has some real talent on the ground. I think that he is a – whoa, sorry about that, folks. Just had a blip in cart in that's very strange. All right, should be better now. Apologies. Let's try and proceed accordingly. But Francis Marshall in this spot, I can't bet on it, right? He is a chalked out favorite, and he's taking on a guy who I expect him to beat, but we've seen underperformances in UFC debuts a million times. I think that this is a winnable fight, but Marcelo Rojo, he's not out there getting bully beat down in the first round of most of these fights. He's going out there, throwing down, making it a scrap, making it competitive, but then he doesn't necessarily have the gas to go the full 15 minutes. He starts to slow down a bit. He starts to, to break at times in these fights and wilt a little bit. Another guy who's been submitted a number of times in his professional career, Marcelo Rojo, but he has been submitted by mostly UFC caliber competition. You look at the Rafa Garcia loss prior to the UFC, you look at some of his other losses in the UFC. They're not to bums. Kyler Phillips, obviously very talented, but, he's another one of these guys who's been back and forth, like, going up and down to weight. I don't really love to see that fluctuation in weight class. I think that makes it a little bit harder to bet on him as well, but this should be a do or die spot for him. He's got 2 losses in a row in the UFC. He really desperately needs this win. But on the other side, Francis Marshall's looking to make the right impression. I think he's going to go out there and try and pursue takedowns. So a lot of people, I think, are expecting a finish here. I would not be surprised if it ends up being, a tough round for Francis Marshall early. He gets hit cleanly a little bit, but he's able to gut it out, get takedowns, end up on top, and kind of wear this guy down and maybe break him late, get the finish. But I wouldn't be surprised if he just rides it out for the full 15, gets a 29-28 decision. So should be a good fight, though, and not one I plan on betting at all. Fight. And this is an interesting one. I think that Natan Levy, a little bit better experience. He's been fighting better guys. But I also think that he leaves himself open at times on the feet. I like his mixing up of his grappling into his striking, though. It seems like he has an answer when he gets the kick caught. A lot of people, they just get taken down from there. But he initiates offense from the caught kick. And I think against a certain level of opposition, that might work, and I think that this might be the kind of fight where he's able to pull that off. So I'm not, counting out Genaro Valdez. He's a scrapper. He's a dog. He likes to get out there and throw hands. But when you got dropped 4 times in the first round of your first UFC fight, I'm not inclined to bet you in the second one out unless I see, a huge improvement, or if I see, something drastically different. I feel like this matchup's not very favorable to him. He's gotten some of his wins by submission. I would be kind of stunned if he submitted Natan Levy here. But the only thing I'll say is I'm not trusting Natan Levy's cardio and, some of his decision-making at this price tag. So for me, this is another clear pass spot, but I understand why people are looking at, some of the finish props, let's say, on the side of Natan Levy, because I do think that he could land a head kick here and get the finish. The guy was hurt a lot in his last fight. He's been in a lot of scrappy wars. Patrick White on the Contender Series nearly finished him. But yeah, I think my man 2 Cents might have hit this one on the head. Levy by submission. I just think he's a higher level grappler. I think he has interesting and unique entries. I'm not sure that Valdez is getting submitted by Natan Levy more often than not. Another fight chalked out. You look at what Vegas is holding the odds for, and it's almost -5s, -6. Jonathan Pierce, very respected at the betting window this week. And it's just, in my opinion, because, it looks like guys moving in the opposite direction. You've got on the one hand, Jonathan Pierce, not every win has come without issue. But he's beating, guys that are scrappy, maybe from a division below. But anybody who competes will tell you, just because somebody's a division smaller than you doesn't mean oftentimes that's gonna I'm seeing that freezing, Narco, and I don't understand. I got a wired internet connection. Give me 1 second, folks. I'm gonna make sure it's plugged in on the other end. Everything seems to be connected. I got the Wi-Fi going too, so hopefully no more problems from here on out, but I appreciate you letting me know. So I agree with Narco. I agree with my boy 2 Cents. I always say sharpest chat in the game. You guys got this one covered. I think Levy by sub is the most likely outcome in this spot. Now we're looking ahead to the next fight. And, Jonathan Pierce, minus 440 at Circa. So they are the ones who are undercutting him a little bit. And I think that that's interesting. The problem that I have with backing Pierce here is, does he win the fight 90% of the time? Like on the money line, that's what you got to say. And I think probably he wins it 80% of the time. I think it's probably an accurate line, but I'm not investing on his money line here. That being said, I understand why people want to play some of those ITD props. Darren Elkins has looked shot to bits in some of his recent fights. I thought the Cub Swanson fight was horrific. It was actually hard to watch. It was, just seems like he can't really take the damage as he used to be able to. And sometimes, it takes a couple bad fights in a row in order for people to, find their way out. So I think, Darren Elkins, tough guy. He just got that new contract. He's obviously going to show up in shape. He always does the right things in preparation, but I can't trust him with my money at this point. So it's a clear pass for me. Michael Johnson and Mark Diakese. I have passed on this fight to this point, but in terms of like an underdog I'm willing to take a shot with, might end up being Michael Johnson here. I thought he looked better than I expected in the Jamie Malarkey fight. I thought Malarkey was going to out-wrestle him with a lot more consistency, and he didn't. He slowed down a bit in that fight. He was able to, force that out of him. So I feel like Michael Johnson, when I look at his skill set, he's a skilled fighter. He's got good process on the feet. He's dangerous. He's got fast hands. So he's starting to slow down just a bit. But I also think when you look at Mark Diakese, he's kind of gone against type. He started out his UFC career as a guy who was trying to get into, stand-up exchanges, the bone crusher. He was throwing low kicks, he was getting in people's face. He got a knockout or two. But since then, he suffered a lot of losses. He shows some losses by sub. And honestly, those easily could have been TKOs as well. But the guys that were fighting him, were more interested in getting the sub. Like he kind of got hurt and stunned by Alves briefly and then got wrapped up in the choke, for example. So, it's about who you're fighting as well as how good you are, how talented you are. I don't think he's just bad at jiu-jitsu or something, and that's why he's getting submitted. I think the reason he was getting submitted is because he was getting stunned with strikes. And he was getting stunned with strikes in some of the fights that went to decision as well, like Fiziev. I felt like he kind of took his foot off the gas in order to preserve his consciousness there, which was a wise decision in the end. But he's been fighting very conservative in his recent bouts. This is a fight that's going to be out in front of the crowd. It's going to be a fight where he's going to get booed again if he does the same kind of, relentless pressure wrestling style game plan. And I'm just struggling to see it working, early on against Michael Johnson. He's shown he's capable of sprawling and brawling. It's a bigger octagon. I think he's going to have space to do so. And he's got laser fast hands. So I think if Mark, does decide, hey, I'm going to play around with this guy on the feet, I'm going to try and throw down with him, Michael Johnson could surprise him. So I like Michael Johnson here as a potential underdog shot. Haven't gotten there yet, but he's one of the guys I've had, just in the back of my mind all week as a potential play. Also, he trained out of that Florida fight scene. This is a fight in Orlando. So if the crowd's to take a favorite, they might be rooting for our guy, Michael Johnson there. So next fight up, guys, we are seeing these are two guys on the end of their career. I'm going to have to get a new connector for my wireless internet because I am baffled by the fact it keeps freezing, guys. I apologize. Anyways, I'm going to push forward. We've got Clay Guida and Scott Holtzman here. This is not a fight that I want to invest heavily in, but I have a feeling Scott Holtzman might knock out Clay Guida. I also could see this being a boring-ass decision, but 14 fights on the card. I got to feel like there's going to be a lot of finishes here, and I feel like the card's been booked accordingly. Hot Sauce, you look at the guys he's been fighting. They gave him no favors, dude. Like, you're fighting Beneil Dariush, top 5 guy. That's really not going to benefit his career. Fighting, the likes. It's not beneficial when you're in your late 30s and you've had less than 12 pro fights and you're fighting these kind of killers. But now he's back to, winnable fights. Like Clay Guida, he's a guy that's lost many UFC fights. The guys that he's beating in the UFC, they're not the best fighters in the world. Marco Madsen, got the win over Clay Guida, was able to shut down the wrestling, wasn't able to shut down the wrestling for even a second against Grant Dawson. So, there's these kind of examples that we get where there's levels in the athleticism, the physicality, especially at lightweight. It's no question. So I think that, the thing that's kept me off this from a money line perspective, especially, is Holtzman's talking about this is probably his retirement fight. So I don't really like betting on people in their retirement fight. It's pretty easy to just say, F it, I'm done. But I also think very winnable matchup. Be nice to go out with a win. I think that's probably what he's going to do here. I think he probably knocks out Clay Guida. I think he's the much harder hitter. I think he's closer to his athletic prime. But I wouldn't be stunned to see Clay Guida have success. It's just not a fight for me that I would invest on the Clay Guida side, personally. Next up, guys, we got a women's strawweight bout between Angela Hill and Emily Ducati. And I cashed on Emily Ducati in her first fight in the UFC. But I've been wrong about Angela Hill. She's gotten better. She's just clearly gotten better over the years. And I haven't fully given her the credit for doing so. So I got to give her that credit. She's done a better job. Oh, God. Colby Chaos got me with the brutality. I'll give you that one, brother. MJ is as reliable as Liam's internet connection. The truth is, MJ will find a way to lose any fight by submission. That is true. I will not put that past you. That's a fair comment, my brother. Hopefully the internet holds up better here as we go. But I will address it for the next stream. Apologies. Next up, guys, Angela Hill, Emily Ducati. Emily is a girl that I think will have success in the UFC. But I almost think that Angela Hill is like kind of sneaky underranked at this point. She almost beat Amanda Lemos, who is my girl. She went out there in the last fight, really delivered in a big way. A lot of people were backing Marina Rodriguez there. I thought that was a good spot for Amanda Lemos, who's a very dangerous fighter. And Angela Hill got blasted with that front kick to the face. She was able to survive, keep pushing forward, and ended up, coming back to arguably win the second and third round there. So, I think that Angela Hill is a gritty girl. I think she's tough. I think she's good in the clinch. I think she's good at distance. And so when I look at Emily Ducati, absorbing almost 4.5, 5 strikes per minute against the Jessica Penays of the world, I'm like, man, Angela Hill is probably going to light her up in a sense where this is probably going to be a very competitive decision. I think if the crowd picks a favorite, it could easily go their way. I think more often than not, this fight sees the scorecards, So this is a fight where I think, it's a dog or pass situation. I think Angela Hill by decision is possible, but I don't hate Raw Torque's pick. If you're like Ducati, I think you take Ducati by decision. I think that this is not an easy girl to finish in Angela Hill. So I'm expecting, the one thing is Ducati, the reason I liked her is that she hadn't shown the ground game in recent fights. She's been bopping people on the feet, but she has some wrestling. She has some grappling in her back pocket. So it would be wise for her to use that here, but can I trust that given her recent performances? I don't know that I can. 2 Cents says Angela is the female MJ without the power. Hey, fair enough. So I might be on 2 unreliable dogs there. But next up, we got Nico Price taking on Phil Rowe. I describe myself as hemming and hawing about this fight on Twitter, and I have been. The advantages for Phil Rowe are clear, right? He's the younger guy by a year. He's got huge length, reach. He's a long guy. But you also look at the fact that Nico Price hits like a truck, weirdly. Doesn't make sense. From positions that make no sense, he knocks people out. He's got an up kick knockout in the UFC. He's got a hammer fist from flat on his back knockout in the UFC over Randy Brown, of all people. So I think Nico Price has some sneaky good fights. I also think he's incurred a ton of damage over the course of his career. I thought he got fouled brutally by Michelle Paeta, just did a jumping backflip onto his face, the first legal stomp in UFC history. Unbelievable. And I thought that was crazy, that no foul was given there, no stoppage in time. But I think that Narco is hitting this on the head. Rowe is a gasser, he says. I think Nico Price is kind of a gasser a little bit in his recent fights too. He's given up the third round to Cowboy Cerrone. The last competitive fight Cowboy had. It's like, I think some of these things are just glaring red flags on both sides. I think violence is a good way to target it potentially. I think both these guys could get knocked out in this spot. I think both these guys could knock out in this spot. So for me, I feel like the guy who's got a better chin and, maybe a little bit more toughness is Nico Price. But I also think that, we've seen Nico Price blasted out of there early. It's not like he's above that. We've seen him incur a ton of damage, whereas Phil Rowe hasn't incurred as much damage in these recent fights. So I think, this is a fight where everybody that is betting on Phil Rowe because he's got the massive reach advantage and he looks, like the side. But I think there's a reason they haven't flipped the favorite as well. I'm just going to peek over at the odds here for Circa Sportsbook. And right now, Circa Sportsbook has minus 125 on Nico Price. So the price has dropped down a little bit, but again, they have not flipped the favorite. And it does feel like a lot of people have been betting and siding with the Philip Rowe side here, but maybe he ends up being the right side. I haven't bet the fight, but for me, that's enough to stay off the Phil Rowe side here. Also, as my man Two Cents says, the strategic miss. He's been fighting pretty low-level opposition in the UFC. A lot of the guys Nico Price has fought have been, long-term winners in the UFC, so I think that that's also worth taking into account. Next up, guys, the other half of the best bet and prop article of the week. I am not a guy that touts Eric Anders bets a lot. I'm not a guy that says you should go part with your money and bet on Eric Anders. But I think that this is a contextual spot where Eric Anders might be the side. And let me explain why. When you look at the recent social media postings, right? In July, Kyle Dawkins posted a video with, bandaging around his eye. He says, I got a surgery on my orbital. I broke my orbital in two places. I broke my eye socket, deep in my eye socket in one place. And this is in July of this year. So you guys can just think back to what you were doing in July, where you were at in your life and your fitness and whatever. And, imagine that, where you can't train hard for 6 to 8 weeks, no sparring, none of that. I think that's not a great recipe for then taking this quick fight on turnaround, signs this fight. Eric Anders is a guy in desperate need of a win. Sometimes guys are complacent in the UFC. There's no room for complacency for Eric Anders because he could lose his job with a loss here. He's on 2 straight losses in the UFC. And you look historically, you almost might get fooled by the fact that Eric Anders has performed somewhat poorly as a dog. I've heard people say he's done well. I believe he was 0-4 by closing line standards as a dog in the UFC. But then you look at the fights themselves. You got to look at the fights for what they are. Jin Young Park is very lucky to have escaped that fight with a win. I had a big bet on Jin Young Park. I was, thinking, damn, I gave this one away. That sucks. Lucky run of variance there that I was able to get that one across the finish line. And I'll tell you what, it told me Eric Anders is making some improvements. He's better than I thought. Jin Young Park is a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's talented on the feet. He could throw a lot of volume. And we've seen that against a lot of opponents. He's broken down a lot of guys. He's taken down a lot of guys and beat them up. Wasn't able to do that there to your boy. And it was a very, very close fight. Yes, he is training at Fight Ready, as my man Narco Cop says. And so when I put out the best bet and prop with my guy Man Bets MMA, we went with Eric Anders on the money line here. Eric Anders, plus 190, in a fight where he's fighting a guy coming back less than 6 months removed from a facial surgery. Doesn't seem like a great recipe for a guy with big, heavy hands. Right now, half of the wins for Eric Anders in the UFC have been by knockout. Against the highest level of competition? No. But then you look at the Darren Stewart fight that ends in a no contest. That almost was a knockout. It was very close to being a knockout. It was one bad decision away from being a knockout. So all these kind of things make me think Eric Anders is a little bit better than his record shows. And then Dawkins, on the other hand, guys, if you've bet on Kyle Dawkins every time out on the money line, you've lost money. It's that simple. You bet on him every time he was a favorite, you lost money. You bet on him every time he was an underdog, you lost money. That's been the way it is with Kyle Dawkins. He's not been making you money. So I like to look at these kind of factors. If you bet on Eric Anders over time, you would have made money. More often than not, as a favorite, he's delivered. But the question is, what's going to happen now? And I think that Eric Anders is very live to get the knockout here. I think he's going to come forward. I think he's going to be extremely aggressive. And I think that he could put him out. I think he could surprise him. Roman Dolidze, nobody was talking about his knockout power and, his extreme aggression and how dangerous. So I just got too heated. I lost the internet there. But I think if you're on the Dawkins side, best of luck. I do think where do I see Dawkins winning this fight? Obvious, by submission. Kyle Dawkins has great Dar series. He's aggressive. He hunts for it. Eric Anders has been putting himself in some vulnerable positions over time. But I do think it's not going to come easy, and I think he could get hurt in the early exchanges here. So best of luck if you're on the Dawkins side. And I think that, Dawkins by sub, don't hate that look. But I think my man Narco Cop, again, KO plus 550. I hit it at plus 600. I like that spot. Next up, guys, Jack Hermansson taking on the aforementioned Roman Dolidze. This is a fight that everybody else is more confident than me, right? Those kind of spots I leave alone. Jack Hermansson, a lot of sharp originators I know like Jack Hermansson. I'll tell you the truth, but I haven't gotten there myself. I think the one thing that I've always doubted about Jack Hermansson is what happens when he gets hit really hard. I don't think he's ever liked it. He's the only guy that ever made Marvin Vettori look like he had power. Fair? I think so. Then you look at the Jerry Cannonier fight. Got really, cleaned up quickly in that affair. Thiago Santos, same thing. It seems like when he's getting hit, when he's against these big hitters, he does panic. Roman Dolidze seems like he can hit hard in that first round. That was a gross knockout against Phil Hawes. Really horrific looking knockout. He's knocked out a couple guys now. He does have power, right? We've seen that. He also has shown he's not a bum on the ground. He is dangerous there. Phil Hawes is not a first-day guy on the ground. He's been wrestling his whole life. He's been grappling for some time. He's not just a bum on the ground. He's not an easy mark. That was really impressive to me, the way he dismantled him with his guard. I think that Roman Dolidze at 185 is a physical force. I do think he is a real presence. But here's the other thing. We've seen a lot of times guys get, overvalued coming into spots when they've done 2-3 fights in a row. And I think that might be a little bit what's happening here in terms of the early lines. But we've also seen there's been a little bit of buyback on Dolidze. I'm going to peek over to the line at Circa and see what they're hanging. Roman Dolidze, it's a minus 185. Everywhere in Vegas is hanging minus 185 right now on Jack Hermansson. And it opened up around minus 150. So definitely been some movement towards the Hermansson side. But yeah, I think that a lot of other people, like my man Narco, very confident in Jack this week. Don't hate it, but not for me. I'll let you guys collect all the money there, but there are guys that could beat him. I think his cardio is a little bit fraudulent, and I think that's where he could get exploited. A couple quick turnarounds, not a chance for a real camp. I think that we could definitely see, an Edmund Shabazian situation where he's tired at the end and Jack gets on top. But I was, puking in my hands when I had Jack ITD against Edmund and he didn't finish, and Edmund has horrific cardio. So yeah, that felt like he kind of took his foot off the gas pedal, let's say. Next, easily. All right, folks, can you see and hear me? I hope so. Oh boy, this has been a tough stream in terms of technical difficulties. Truly apologize. Here we go. Tai Tuivasa, Sergey Pavlovich. I have been backing both these guys recently. Derek Lewis has been one of my most profitable fades in the UFC. A lot of people like betting him. I like betting against him, but I've paid for it at times, right? I actually bet a Dawkins brother against him just for one unit, and it ended up giving that away. But most of the time, I've been cashing those bets, fading him. I like Tai Tuivasa as a bet. I even bet him against Cyril Gane. Everybody called me stupid. And in the end, you guys got the money. So congratulations. I did feel slightly vindicated. I was one of the first people that had tracked a bet on Tai Tuivasa. I tracked it as soon as the event prior had ended. And then I ended up losing confidence and faith in it by the end. I just thought, Cyril Gane in France, probably not going to go my way. Ended up not going my way, but he represented himself well. In this spot, though, I think some people don't really understand Sergey Pavlovich. He's a guy that I feel like the UFC has been high on since he arrived. He comes in, he gets a fight against Alistair Overeem. They were trying to usher Overeem out in all the matchmaking around that. And, they tried to feed this guy the win. He came in way overhyped there. UFC debut. I talk about the fact people get jitters. They underperform. That's exactly what we saw. He went out there guns a-blazing. Then he got hit hard. He started to, panic about his cardio. And he ended up getting taken down by Overeem, who at that point, guys, had changed his game completely. He was either a completely outside striker or he would find takedowns and knock people out quickly, like he did to Struve, for example. So he had opportunities, in that fight at distance. And as soon as it got closed down and he got taken down, he got battered there. That has not happened since. He got really soft matchmaking. Again, the UFC clearly wants this guy to do well based on the guys they were feeding him, the Maurice Greens of the division. And then they did the same thing that they did for Sergey for Tai Tuivasa, right? Tai Tuivasa got it first, where he got to go out there against Derek. They're like, Derek's on the downswing. He's not training as hard for the fights. He's not here for the world title. He doesn't care as much. So, we're going to feed Derek to these young up-and-coming guys who we could try and build a name in the division. Now, that's happened for both these guys. They're both in the top 10. Now the question is, who's the real talent of the division? And I haven't put together power rankings for all the divisions. I plan on doing that in the future. But one division that I did put together power rankings was heavyweight. And I did think that in terms of the UFC rankings versus my rankings, it was, Tai Tuivasa was one of the more overranked fighters. And I said that on Twitter at the time. I thought he was one of the more overranked fighters in his division. Now you go back and watch the fights. Tai Tuivasa is a beast. He's a fun guy to watch. He'll take one to give one. But I almost called him Jeff Hardy. Oh my goodness. That shows I need more coffee. Excuse me. Greg Hardy had this guy rocked briefly, and then he got instantly killed. Tai Tuivasa, people forget this because it happened in 2019. He got taken down relentlessly and then finished on the ground by Sergey Spivak, who hasn't been the most prolific finisher in the world, and who's fought a lot of guys who are heavy-handed that he couldn't stand up to. But he was able to easily stand up to Tai in that spot, put him under a lot of pressure, bully him around in the clinch. We've seen Tai make significant improvements since then to his wrestling, his grappling, and his striking. But I don't think that all those improvements are a necessary component to say he is definitely going to beat Sergey Pavlovich. You look at Sergey Pavlovich, he's 30 years old. He looks like he was built in a laboratory. He probably was. Then you look at the fact that he's 1 inch taller. He's got 9 inches of reach. Then you can understand why the line has gotten to where it's gotten, in my opinion. And what's interesting to me is it seems like Tai Tuivasa is a very popular play. He's a very public play, and the line's going the other way. Shouldn't that tell us something? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm dead wrong. But I feel like Tai Tuivasa has been a very popular pick this week among Twitter, if you're a casual observer of MMA, are you going to bet on the big, scary, random Russian guy, or are you going to bet on Tai Tuivasa to go out there, get the knockout, and chug beers? He absorbed over 100 significant strikes against Cyril Gane, and now he might be back too soon, as my man Narco says. So timing, context is everything in MMA, as far as I'm concerned. And when I look at this fight and I try and discern the context, Sergey Pavlovich has a ton of momentum. He's extremely dangerous, and the UFC really likes him. And Tai Tuivasa, most of the same things can be said, except he's coming back off a loss. He's had a couple losses now to the top level guys in the division. And so he's taking a step down. And do you think they want to have, Tai right back into the title mix? Maybe. but maybe they want to have new guys into the title mix. Maybe they want to have new fresh contenders, and maybe they want to serve a different market. So it's just something to think about. But I think that this is a winnable fight for both guys. I think the fight ends inside the distance. Shout out to my man Fresh. He says if it goes to decision, Ty going to win. I think that's fair. But I also think, I don't see these boys going to decision. Both these guys like getting their work done early. And I think I tend to agree with my man 2 cents here, to be honest with you. I do think Ty has a good chin. I think he's a tough guy, but he gets hit cleanly in every fight. And I think it's a different story when you're observing over 100 significant strikes against Cyril Gane and coming back real quick. He took a pretty bad beating there, took a lot of shots to the body as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if Pavlovich, with that length, with that reach, is able to mix it up and land some long, heavy strikes with his boxing. I think his boxing is quite good, actually. So we'll see how the fight plays out. Next up, guys, very fun fight. Matheus Nicolau, one of my favorite flyweight prospects, is taking on Matt Schnell. I got to just own an L, right? I talk to you guys about when I win the bets. I'll talk to you about when I lose the bets. I did a faceplant L a little bit on Sumu Darji. Not a crazy amount, but I thought his inside the distance prop at plus money was very fair. And he rocks the guy, over and over and over, and just could not get him out of there. Extremely impressive comeback from Matt Schnell, UFC Long Island. My buddy Pete was there. Great show in person, I'm sure. Great comeback. Really impressive stuff. But I took that faceplant L. Shout out to Nicole. She took that faceplant L too. So I think that this is a fight where, Matheus Nicolau, I do expect that he's the better striker. I think that he is a clean striker. I don't think he throws a lot of volume. So maybe the volume edge could go to Matt Schnell. That's where he becomes potentially interesting as a dog. But I also think that bailing himself out with takedowns, I think that's very possible. I think that bailing himself out with takedowns could be the answer here. You look at Matt Schnell, he's got a lot of losses in the first round. I don't like that going against a guy like Nicolau, who he doesn't have the finishes yet in the UFC, but you could tell that he's a dangerous guy. He's hit guys and hurt them. He's landed cleanly on a lot of guys' chins. And I think that against Matt Schnell, that could be, the end of the story. We talk about the chin is a really difficult thing to predict, but that was a war. That was a brutal fight. That was extremely, violent. He time traveled like 3 or 4 times and just paused there. And I think that, there's some momentum for Schnell coming out of that fight, but there's also a lot of damage, that he's taken forward into this next fight. And Matheus Nicolau is a lot more careful. I think he's a lot more managed. I don't think he puts himself at risk as much as Matt Schnell. So I like Matheus Nicolau to get this done. I think he could get it done in a variety of ways. I think he could play it conservative and win a decision here. But I also think that more often than not, Matheus Nicolau, maybe it's a club and sub, maybe he just finds that chin. But I think that he's got good counterpunching. I think he's a pretty sharp guy. And I think he's, going to try and get the win to propel his career forward here. So I like Matheus Nicolau to find the win. Next up, guys, Rafael Dos Anjos taking on Bryan Barberena. This is a theme on this card. Guys coming back really quick after brutal knockouts. And I think that RDA in every skill category is superior to Bryan Barberena. I do believe that. I think he's the better striker. I think he's the better grappler. I think he, arguably has better cardio. I think he's a better wrestler. For me, what it comes down to in this kind of fight is the fact that it's contextual. Once again, you offer this fight at pick'em odds, you think it's a no-brainer for RDA. He's the better fighter. You offer this fight at minus 200, minus 230. Does RDA win this 7 out of 10 times? I mean, yeah, you'd have to imagine that he's better. But I bet against Bryan Barberena with Matt Brown. I was in person there, took another faceplant L, and it wasn't a huge bet, but it was just surprising to me that it was a split decision that went against Matt Brown in Columbus, Ohio. So Bryan Barberena, clearly very popular amongst a segment of the fan base. He's been around for a long time. He's a very tough guy. He's a gritty guy. He's been fighting a much lower level of competition, than RDA. But I talked about another, system that I don't really like betting into, which is guys that are fluctuating in weight class over and over. And RDA has been up, down to 170 to 155 to 170 to 155. And I think that, he probably asked for this fight. It's an easier matchup on paper, get a guy that you could take to the ground at 170. But Bryan Barberena hasn't been submitted since 2010. And so I do think people acting like him getting submitted here is a foregone conclusion are getting a little bit ahead of themselves. I think that Bryan gets taken down, but he oftentimes works back up to his feet. The thing is, it's a big cage. It's a big cage. And that might open up more opportunities for RDA to work in the open mat. My boy, I certainly wouldn't go that far. I think that RDA, his welterweight run is actually somewhat impressive. I thought he had an argument in the Colby Covington fight. I thought Colby ended up winning, but it was like 3-2. It was a very close fight. But I do think we've been seeing less and less of that RDA, over time. I can't look away from that Moicano fight. The Moicano fight was extremely impressive. He went out there, and granted, Moicano was drinking beers and doing whatever, showed up on 5 rounds and still competed. But he's a young man. He's active in the division. He's a tough guy, and he was able to stand in the fire and then push RDA in that 5th round, after absorbing a lot of damage. So that told me that RDA wasn't the same killer maybe that he always was. Why did he not take Moicano out of there? It was shocking to me, at the time. But now I just think it might be he's at a different place. He's trying to get the wins, by greasing out these decisions, by gutting them out, by winning the minutes. And I think eventually that bill will come due. I think that Bryan is probably just going to get taken down too much to win here. But I have to agree that the odds are probably too wide here. You've just seen some improvements from Bryan in these recent performances. He's beating guys like Robbie Lawler, who, again, past prime, but he's a guy who's been a 185 pounder and a 170 pounder, not a 155 pounder and a 170 pounder. So Bryan's been fighting big guys. Matt Brown, he's a big, sizable welterweight. He's not a slouch either with his wrestling. He kind of gasses out, but that guy can move. And I think that all of that goes to show Bryan isn't done just yet. I think he's done much better in the subsequent fights since recovering from surgery, since getting dropped by Jason Witt of all people. But I think that this is the kind of run where he said he's on a Legends Killing tour. I think RDA could definitely win the fight, but I can't bet on him at these odds. Maybe the fight, I don't even know. I don't even know what to bet on this fight. I guess it's a dogger pass situation. I'll close my thoughts with that. It's a dogger pass situation. Main event. This is a big one. Welterweight fight. Kevin Holland saying if the next title shot at 185 is given to Khamzat Chimaev, he's going to retire from mixed martial arts because he says he didn't need to take the fight. He shouldn't have taken the fight. Can't really disagree with that. But I think that, my man 2 Cents does make a bit of a point. Kevin Holland, I really like him, right? I think he's a great fighter. I think he's a fun personality. I think he's good for MMA. But his resume is not exactly exemplary, right? You look at the things that he does well. What does Kevin do well? I would have said his submission defense because my man Derek Brunson had him locked in that head and arm choke for a very long time, and Kevin was able to hold up to it. He did a decent enough job trying to scramble out of that choke from Chimaev, but after the re-cinching of that Darce choke, it was all over for our boy Kevin. Kevin was also en route to being submitted by Kyle Dawkins, you guys will remember, in a fight that did not end up, counting because of a head clash. Even though the fight continued after the head clash for like another minute and a half. Very strange occurrence there. Got voided out on all my Kyle Dawkins ITD bets there. I think that Kevin he's been beating guys that are pretty uninspiring at welterweight. Is that fair? Tim Means, not a very inspiring win. I think Tim Means a good fighter, but just in terms of if you want to say I'm a welterweight contender, you can't bring that to the table as your calling card. Similarly, you look at some of the other fights that Kevin's had. The Chimaev fight doesn't go his way quickly. Then we have Tim Means, goes his way. I bet on him hugely. I bet on him inside the distance. I bet on him to win by sub. I bet on him against Alex Oliveira. All those same bets that I just described, I bet on him again. Because I felt like those were super winnable fights. You look at the resumes for these guys, 22-11-1, 32-12-1. These are 10 loss guys. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is not that. He's got 6 losses in professional MMA. You look at the guys he's been beating. I feel like that Jeff Neal win ages tremendously well, given some of the other body of work that Jeff's been able to put together in subsequent performances. But I think that there's a lot at play here. Wonderboy, what do I expect from him? It's hard to know. In his last 2 fights, was I impressed? No. Was I a little bit underwhelmed? Yes. Was I a little bit impressed that he didn't get submitted by Gilbert and that Gilbert looked like he was holding on to him for dear life? Yeah, sure. But that was a fight you're coming off that fight. A lot of times guys just have that letdown spot, and he was able to win. He was able to grit it out, get the decision, keep his name relevant in the division, knock Wonderboy down a peg. Then you look at the Bilal Muhammad fight. If you had ever told me 5 years ago that Bilal Muhammad would be back mounting Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and nearly finishing him in the first round, I would puke in my hands. So I think that there has definitely been a drop-off in Wonderboy. But the friendly dynamic to this fight, I don't like it. From a betting perspective, if I'm going to bet on you to win, I want to be like all in that you want to do harm to this person. You are violent against them. You are ready to do what it takes to win and be violent, vicious, whatever you got to do. If you're not cheating, you're not trying, all these things, any of it, whatever it takes. If you're not doing that to win, I got a little bit of skeptical hippo eyes. The one problem I've had with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in these recent fights, I had a big bet on him against Jeff Neal. But I didn't like that he didn't put his foot on the gas and try and get him out of there. And he didn't do it against Vicente Luque. When he's styling on these guys on the feet, oftentimes he does not put that finishing blow on them. And if you leave these guys hanging around for the full 25 minutes, they could beat you. They could catch you. They could knock you on the chin. It happened against Anthony Pettis. So I think that that's my real problem in this fight. From a value betting perspective, I understand why people want to bet on Wonderboy, honestly, because he is an extremely unpopular bet. Nobody wants to bet on Wonderboy this week. Everybody thinks that Kevin Holland's a foregone conclusion. And I kind of get it because Kevin is just dangerous for 25 minutes. He's got more paths to win the fight. He could knock you out. He could win the decision. He could submit you. It's like, if Wonderboy submitted Kevin Holland, I would be very surprised, right? I think most of us would say the same. But if Wonderboy knocked out Kevin Holland, am I like completely stunned? No. And let me explain why. When I look back, Kevin Holland has slowed down in some of these fights. Some of the fights that have gone 25 minutes, he's looked better than others. But like at welterweight, have we seen him go like a hard 25 minutes? Not in recent years. I think that when you look at the Darren Stewart fight, he said, like, I should have lost that one. It was a bad look. He was getting easily out-wrestled and taken down by Darren Stewart, not a traditional wrestler. So I think that that's a great point by Colby Chaos. Holland never been knocked down. I don't think it would be a case of Holland's chin being bad at all. I just would say the chances that Holland could gas out, I think, are present given his weight cut scenario, as well as the fact that, he's a guy that's kind of gassed out a little bit in the past. But I think if you're looking at this fight as a unique opportunity, if you took Kevin Holland at evens, if you took Kevin Holland at -115, -120, -125, I just simply can't fault you. I think saying that Kevin Holland's a 60% favorite here, I get that. But it's actually creeping over that. It's creeping towards 65, 70%. That I think is too big an adjustment. As my man Jack Attack says, out wrestled by the dentist. That's pretty dangerous. MMA Locker Room, my man Locker Room. I'm going to be live with him on Pub Sports Radio later today. He's got Matt Schnell plus 320. Bet it, don't regret it. Okay, you don't like my boy Matheus Nicolau? I understand. Kevin Holland minus 110. Beat the number. So if you beat the number, you're doing your job right. That's what we always say. Guys, we've done it. We went through the whole card. I have some time on my hands here real quick. So if you guys got any questions, comments, things you want to get off your chest, bets that you have questions about, please feel free. The other thing I want to mention real quick before we get out of here for sure is that this show, all my stuff I do, my content is brought to you by PrizePicks, easiest game in all of DFS. One of the looks that I do like for PrizePicks today, a couple people reached out to me in the DMs. Always feel free to do that. I haven't played it yet, but I'm definitely looking at Jack Hermanson over 56.5 significant strikes. I just feel like Jack is a guy that likes to load up volume on the feet. I feel like if the wrestling cancels out, he'll easily clear that. Also, if Jack's getting on top in the takedown scenarios, I feel like he could definitely land, a lot of ground and pound. That was his calling card early in his UFC run. He was a big ground and pound finisher. So I like Jack Hermanson over significant strikes today on PrizePicks. If you guys decide you want to try it out, all the information's in the description box below. Use my promo code Liam. They'll deposit match you 100% up to $100. Colby Chaos asked fight of the night, performance of the night predictions. I think that, Dana White always does the looking for, or what is it called? God, I'm forgetting it now. Brutal. He does the same gimmick every week. Like, if you don't know, now you know, right? And if you don't know, now you know fight of the week is Yasmin Waregi and Estela Nunes. I do think that we're going to see a breakout performance from Yasmin Waregi. I do think people might be surprised by her ground game. I do think she is a talented player on the ground for a purple belt. I think that for her, placement in the division, she might be able to exploit that over some girls. She hasn't used it in all of her fights, but it's in her back pocket. And I think that this is the kind of fight where it might make sense for her to use it. So I kind of like that fight of the night. What is going to be the best fight of the night? I'll tell you what, I don't think it's the main event. I think fight of the night. I think, honestly, Philip Rowe and Nico Price could put on a fight of the night for sure. I think that Francis Marshall and Marcelo Rojo could put on a fight of the night for sure. So those would be my two picks. I think that Marshall and Rojo fight might slow down towards the end, but I think it's going to be completely wild for the early going. So should be fun, especially if they decide to swing it out on the feet. I do think that Marshall doesn't have the best defense, but I think his offense is fine on the feet as well. So I think both guys could land hard in the early exchanges, and then Marshall might take him down, try and make the job a little bit easier. But I think both those guys are going to bring it. I think they're going to scrap. So those would be two of my fights that I'm expecting a fight of the night type contender. And I'll tell you what, if Ducati and Angela Hill stays on the feet, I think that's going to be a hell of a fight as well. I think that's going to be a hell of a fight. I don't always say, I'm looking forward to this Jennifer Maia fight. I'm not a guy who's trying to sell you on bullshit, but there's some fights where I do get excited. I think Angela Hill and Emily Ducati are both fighters I like watching. They go out there and swing, so should be good fun. Other questions we got here. What do you think of my plays for the main card? Nico Price, I like it. Jack Hermanson, I like it. Kyle Dawkins, I don't like it. I'm on the other side. Nicolau, I probably wouldn't lay the chalk, but it seems like you got a decent enough number. I think you might have beat the closing line. RDA, I've said my hesitancy for backing RDA at the price, but I do think he's better skilled everywhere. I think Pavlovich wins the fight. I personally don't lay that chalk at heavyweight, but I think Pavlovich wins the fight. And I would not take that line on Holland personally. But I do think, again, if you were offered it at minus 110, minus 115, I think that was probably the right side to be on. Market's borne that out. But I think at this point, a lot of people are crowded onto the Kevin Holland side when the number might have gotten away from him. Liam, best two-fighter parlay. You guys will also know I'm not a very big parlay bettor. You guys can always see my third-party tracked results. The one thing that I am not very good at, and especially this year, is parlays. I don't track them a lot. I don't bet them a lot. I bet them for fun, if anything. But I'd say best two-leg parlay. That's an interesting question. Not a lot of favorites that I'm super in love with this week. To tell you the truth. I could tell you a parlay that I actually bet. I bet $5 on Eric Anders by knockout and Yasmin Oregi by sub to win over $500. So that's my long shot for the night. But let's see. Yeah, man, I just don't really believe in these guys as favorites. I think JSP should win, but the chalk price is disgusting. I think Scott Holtzman should win, but not betting on somebody in a parlay in their retirement fight. Yeah, man. It's tough. It's tough going. Everybody that's a theoretical parlay leg is juiced beyond belief. So I think that's just something that will keep me off. Holtzman and Rowe parlay, I don't hate that, man. I think Holtzman is probably a good leg among some of the other legs. I like it, in terms of both price and likelihood of winning. I like that leg. Rowe, probably not for me, but again, I think he's got a lot of physical advantages. He's got the youth. He's got the durability, potentially. So I don't hate the play on Rowe, but I do think it's a little bit of a crapshoot for me. I think it's priced pretty appropriately. Maybe Rowe should be a pick 'em, but I don't think he should be a favorite. Some player props you like. All right, let's see it. We've got Elijah checking in. Appreciate you, Elijah, and appreciate everybody. We got 107 people rocking with us live. So thank you guys for making time on your fight day. I know you guys are busy, and I truly appreciate you being here. Player props I'm liking are Jonathan Pierce over. So basically, Jonathan Pierce to get the finish. Okay. Wonderboy plus 10.5 strikes against Holland. Interesting. That's a great question. I feel like the volume is going to be, I don't hate that at all. I feel like the volume will be very similar for both guys. And, Wonderboy could get off on more volume and then just get knocked out. He's a little bit older. I talk about it all the time, guys. Fightnomics, definitely the one thing that is definitely bolstering Kevin Holland, which Fightnomics suggests is one of the biggest predictors of somebody losing, is like fighting into a big age gap. And then another fact from the book is that fighters over 38 years of age are disproportionately likely to get knocked out, way disproportionately to their peers. So basically, you look at a graph and like age and getting knocked out is like this, and then you hit 38 and it goes and spikes. So those are the kind of things when people are over 38 and they engage in a lot of stand-up striking fights. It's something you got to really hesitate about. You got to be sure that they're in a good position. That being said, huge hitter Jeff Neal went the full 25 with Wonderboy, never landed a punch that was very significant until the 5th round. And even then, Wonderboy was never rocked, wobbled, hurt, stunned, any of that. He's had a pretty good chin historically. The difference was, in fact, Bilal Muhammad was basically on top of him, just unloading shots for free. And Wonderboy didn't go out in that situation either. He's tough, but at 38, those are when the wheels can start to fall off a little bit. So that's my great hesitancy. Colby Chaos says, smash the like, boys. I appreciate that. Any ladies out there, if you smash the like button, I also appreciate that. But guys, that's basically what I've got for you. In terms of what's coming up from this channel, make sure you guys get subscribed, turn on notifications, whatever you want to do. But if you guys want to hear more about the James Krause situation, my opinion on it, I've been talking about this on Pub Sports Radio for a while. I've mentioned it in passing that I don't like betting on James Krause fights on this show. And now you guys are starting to see the reasons why. I've always had some skeptical hippo eyes about the insider trading of information that goes on in the UFC. And so we're going to have a broader discussion about that. It's going to be on this channel. So if you guys are interested in that kind of conversation, stay tuned, get subscribed, and look forward to discussing it with, from the Crouch Gym. And I'm going to go fix my internet in the meantime. So good luck on your bets, and I'm going to get out of here before this stream completely craps out of me. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me through the technical difficulties. We'll see you next time.